and welcome to this very short introduction to somatics, where I'm looking primarily at pandiculation, which is what we do to increase flexibility and move away from pain. My name is Samantha Holland. I'm an essential somatics movement teacher, and I also teach clinical education. My passion is teaching people this work so that they can get themselves away from pain, which is why an awful lot of people come to the work, but also for people who think, as I did, that they just are tight. There's something about them structurally, whether it's, I was told I had a birth defect, for example, in my hips, which it turned out I didn't, or they just feel like they can't, for example, get into certain yoga poses, or they can't do certain sports, or they can't do them well because of the way they're built. And a lot of what we do in somatics work is reveal to people that what the problem is muscle tension that they can resolve. So it's not that they're born tight or that they can't relax enough to let go. It's that often we're told to stretch gently, and while that gets some short-term results, which are often encouraging and indicate that you're on the right track, that often people find it doesn't help over time, or again, with my experience and that of quite a few of my clients, that you kind of get tighter over time, and it's very frustrating and actually can be quite upsetting because again, it gives rise to feelings that you just can't do it, or you're built wrong, or you're not in the right mindset, right? There's that kind of idea as well. If you have difficulty getting into comparatively easy yoga poses, you can feel like you're just not able to relax and that you just should be able to. And one of the revelations for me with somatics work is that you can relax your muscles, but you do need the right strategy to enable you to do that. So you'll have seen on my short video, perhaps, a really super fast outline of what pandiculation is, which is what we do instead of stretching. And we do that because that's actually how human beings, along with all other mammals and a lot of other animals, evolved. Thomas Hanna, who set up this work, does talk a lot about how a technologized society, just modern society, seems to have moved us away from that, so we've forgotten it. So we talk a lot in somatics about sensory motor amnesia, about forgetting how to sense and how to move. And also, on a more general level, we've forgotten that we need to pandiculate and sort of replaced it, I think, perhaps with stretching, with forcing, with wanting to get there quicker, maybe, I'm not sure. But what pandiculation is gently taking your muscles as they are and contracting the area of muscle that's tight, or the area that you want to be moving. You contract it primarily to bring your brain and nervous system's attention to it. And then where you do the work is in a very slow release. You pay attention. You're giving yourself, your brain, your nervous system, new information. And often in this slow release, you can get a little bit more muscle length. And then you let it rest, and you don't push it past, you just let it rest. That third part makes this a pandiculation. That enables your brain to integrate the information that you've given it. So it's not just contract release, it's contract, slow, aware, voluntary release, noticing where you do and don't have control, noticing where it goes jumpy or shaky and where it's nice and smooth, so that you can consciously try to improve that, right? The third part is just let your nervous system integrate, take in that information, so that you can tell yourself that in fact your muscles can release just a little bit more. With pandiculation, you're giving your nervous system a cue that you're going to give it new information, and then you give it slow, gentle, voluntarily controlled information. And at the end of each movement, it tends to release a little bit more. So stretching would tighten a little bit more, pandiculating releases a little bit more, and you just give it time to take that in. So pandiculating shoulders, which I'm showing you, is an easy way to learn what pandiculation is. It also helps quite a lot with tight shoulders. It doesn't just help with tight shoulders, because your shoulders are part of your back. Your back is part of those massive muscles at your center, your shoulder blades, right, and all that's going on around them. So even if this doesn't look very exciting in terms of getting into good stretches for running or weightlifting or yoga or whatever, it's quite important to release your shoulders, because then you start to release your back. So just do this a couple of times more. So your fingers are just there for feedback. You're not pushing into your fingers and you're not pushing down with your fingers. You're just paying attention to what's there. When you contract up, feel what's tight. Let go what you don't need, right? And then keep breathing and just let go. And you'll probably feel some of your muscles relaxing under your fingers. And you might feel if it jumps or shakes. Or notice if it speeds up when you don't intend it to. That's sensory motor amnesia. And then just let that shoulder go. Notice if it feels any different. And if it doesn't, be aware that that might be not because it hasn't changed, but because your sensory abilities from the inside might not be as acute as they can become. Take up that opposite shoulder, contract it as far as is comfortable, never into pain, but it's good to go as far as you can, and you might go. Slowly release that, notice differences side to side, and let that go. Integrate that information. So pandiculation replaces stretching in all the movements that we teach in somatics, and you can replace stretching regime in whatever you do with pandiculation. I would say that you do have to learn a number of movements so that you really can think through how to access different parts of your body. So that would be the main benefit of doing some somatic classes, learning the principles if that's something you're interested in, right? So taking classes, learning some of the fundamental movements and developing that practice is make you realize how important it is that pandiculation is about voluntary control and about experiencing yourself helpfully from the inside, and how you might start to feel that going into stretch is something you really don't want to do because of that awareness. And that is actually how most animals function. So we do talk about the cat stretch, right? We do talk about a cat or a dog stretching. They're not stretching, they're pandiculating. They're consciously just slightly contracting so that they can ease out, and then that little shake they give is like their third part of the pandiculation. They're just letting themselves rest for a moment and just taking the info and then get moving. So the real value of learning this work in a little depth is that then you can extrapolate from that to your own discipline. So if you're a runner and you do a stretching regime before you go running, you can change that to pandiculate those same muscles in ways that work for you. If you're a bodybuilder, pandiculation can be incredibly useful, so you're not putting unnecessary strain, but you are increasing your ability to move easily and flexibly. If you do practice something like yoga, it's incredibly helpful to pandiculate into longer, more comfortable movements and poses rather than try and push yourself. And it does, in many ways, feel better, feel more yogic to be doing something easily and smoothly. And another really important area is if you have worries about, or you actually do have decreased mobility or ease of movement as you're getting older or as you're recovering from an injury. One of the key tenets of this work is that there's a really problematic myth of aging, that you will inevitably seize up, become less flexible as you age, and Thomas Hanna taught, and we in Essential Somatics Movement Teaching absolutely teach that that's not the case. That as you age, you can learn more, you can teach your own nervous system more, and you can regain and even improve your flexibility. If you take somatics classes, then it's not exercises, it's not movement, it's not even just learning to be more flexible. It's actually learning how to move more naturally and challenging myths around aging, around stretching, and around pain. I'm right now just going to give you a couple of examples of movements, and they are working with the center, okay? You lengthen limbs and work with extremities. But since the most important thing in this work is to get your center fluid and flexible and moving so that you can move the rest of your body more fully and easily, then this is the place that I'm going to start. So one thing that's quite different from a lot of other movement is that rather than, say, breathing into the belly and just breathing into the belly, where your back might still be kind of rigid, the emphasis in somatics is moving your whole body. Every movement is a full body movement. There's no real isolation. So we might focus on one part, but to pandiculate, you need to move throughout your whole soma. So, for example, in a movement that's called arch and release, you would breathe into your belly, arch your back, and allow your hips to rock forward, your pelvis to rock towards your toes, your chin to come down, and your shoulders to go back. So all the muscles of your back are engaged, okay? But you're not pushing, you're not forcing them, you're allowing them all to move in one pattern, which actually I would call the tight back reflex. And you ease out of that all at once. So you're breathing in 1, 2, 3 times, doesn't matter. Releasing your back, your spine. At the same time, letting your pelvis rock back to rest, your shoulders come back to rest, your head and your chin come back to rest. And you're pandiculating the whole of your back. So you're improving the flexibility of your spine just by doing this movement, but doing the full movement. So say it's arch, you're arching your spine, but you're not doing arch and release if you only move your spine and isolate it. You need to let your pelvis rock, your chin and your neck and your head move. Your feet, the weight on your feet will differ. So you've got all these things going on. That is a pandiculation. That's what cats and dogs do quite often. 60 times a day if you're a cat. And keep breathing. On a breath in, out, you would release your back and come back to center. And we try not to use the term neutral in case it's misleading. You come back to rest, right? Wherever rest is for you at that particular time. You can also pandiculate your front, and these relate to full body patterns of stress that we deal with in this work. I'm just going to show you, for example, you could put your fingers on your sternum, your fingers on your lower belly to give yourself some guidance. Breathe in gently. So your hips might rock away a little bit, your back arches slightly. Focus on breathing out, sinking your center. So your sternum and your pubic bone rock towards each other. Your chin goes up. Your whole pelvis rocks up. So everything is sinking in the center down towards the ground. Your shoulders will come up as well. Your chin will tip up and back. Your knees might want to come together, right? So this is not just a breath out. This is a breath out and everything in your whole body pattern going with it. So you're contracting your front and then slowly breathe in once, twice, 3 times. Start lengthening from your center out. You're pandiculating your front, but lots of other muscles all involved, all starting to release and lengthen. And then you breathe for a moment. Let your nervous system take in that information. So a lot of what we do, instead of stretching, is pandiculate large muscle areas. The idea being that you go into tightness and tension, contraction, to get your nervous system's awareness and to say, this is not where I want to be. I want to get out of that. So that your nervous system develops ways of not getting into tightness and tension, not pushing and stretching and forcing, but discovering that it can actually have longer, more malleable muscles without having to force or push. So in fact, we're not really talking about lengthening muscles necessarily in somatics, but having voluntary control of them so that we can lengthen and shorten them without causing them any damage and without stress or strain or pain. I'm just going to pandiculate my back again in this arch and release movement. So you do breathe into your belly, but you let your pelvis rock, let your back arch, let your shoulders go back and your chin come down. So the back of your neck is lengthening a little onto the ground. So you should go as far as you comfortably can, but never into pain and rarely into discomfort. You're pandiculating your back, but you're also pandiculating a lot of related muscles. So as you slowly ease your muscles out of that, you release your back. Shoulders will move, your shoulder blades, your pelvis, your hips, your hip flexors, all sorts of things are releasing. And they can get more released. So they will be slightly more released when you finish the pandiculation and allow yourself to just rest than they were at the beginning. And unlike with the stretch reflex, where they're pulled back, the message to your nervous system here is that it's good for them to be a little bit longer. Okay. That's pandiculating not just your center, which is important to have a soft fluid center so that you can get more flexible, because everything moves from the center. If your center is rigid and tight, then you won't be able to reach or stretch as far, right? If your center is malleable and movable and controllable, that enables you to get longer, more flexible limbs and other muscles. So one example might be that hip flexors that can be really tricky for some people. Pandiculating them can be really gentle. You can just be like this with your knees up, feet on the ground, and put the palm of your hand on your side just for some feedback. Breathe in. Feel a little bit of tension in that hip flexor, and then slowly, as you breathe out, or you can reverse the breathing, it doesn't really matter, slowly, gently ease that leg out along the ground, and you are pandiculating it. So you are getting a little bit more flexibility, a little more length in those muscles in the hip area, just by doing that, rather than by trying to stretch them. Do it on the other side. All it is. You're not even really consciously contracting. You're using your breath, really. So breathe in. There will be a contraction in here. Start lengthening your leg out, releasing your leg as you breathe out. Just keep breathing, however. Let that leg slowly, with control, come to lie out flat. And just notice if your hip flexors feel any different. And a lot of this is about noticing, because if you don't notice the subtle differences, then you won't know that you're getting more flexible, more supple, and you might be encouraged to force it. And the idea really is to learn a lot more sensory awareness, right? So we teach through movement, but we also teach awareness, sensory awareness of yourself from the inside, so that you can tell more when you might go into stretch or pain, so should stop. And you can tell more about what's changed and what movement has worked for you to change it. Because, as I think people say a lot about stretching regimes, right, it's not the same for everyone. So I really wouldn't even call that the tip of the iceberg. I mean, it's like the wave across the top of the tip of the iceberg. But it's some indication of what somatics does that's very, very different, to enable you to feel more mobile, more supple, and to lengthen and release muscles, which is what gives you greater flexibility. The reason I'm not showing, for example, a somatic hamstring stretch is that really you need to learn the fundamentals, which you can do for free, or you can do it on paid courses, right? About not just what pandiculation is, but a range of movements that enable you to get that real flexibility in your center, and therefore from your center out, which is really crucial to not just knowing what pandiculation is, but making it work in all areas of your life, and where increasing your flexibility is going to be really important to your performance and your enjoyment of things like yoga weightlifting, running, cycling. But also that increased flexibility and suppleness is going to be really important to people who are just struggling with daily activities like walking and getting up from being seated, getting a good night's rest, actually relaxing. So it really does depend on how you want to apply this movement work. And my hope is that you're interested enough that you might want to look into, what is arch and flatten? How does that help you move the rest of your body? We also work a lot with backlifts that are not like a yogic backlift because they use pandiculation and gentleness. And a lot of work with tight sides, right? Getting movement into our sides because a lot of us suffer from, say, an old injury or carrying a bag on one shoulder or a child on one hip over an extended period. So we are lopsided. And often our flexibility can be really negatively affected by holding tight muscles in a one-sided pattern, especially if we're not fully aware of it or we think it's a structural defect. And if you have tight muscles on one side compared to the other side is also pulling because it's trying to keep you upright. So there are a lot of ways in which muscle tightness really negatively impacts on flexibility, not just in certain areas, but in your whole body, because those patterns of tightness usually radiate out into full body patterns. And it's full body patterns of tightness that fundamentally essential somatic movement and most somatic work in the tradition of Thomas Hanna addresses. We look at full body patterns of tightness, where they come from, how they relate to our stress responses, and therefore give us lots of important varied ways to get into those patterns of tightness, identify our individual patterns of tightness so that we can release and lengthen out of them. And that is where we start really getting much more flexible, much more supple, moving more easily, and moving without pain.